Good morning everyone. I'm here today to tackle about Module 2. The lesson to the history, philosophy and objectives of imprisonment and development of prisons. Sing Sing Prison, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System, 5 deployment of prisoners, form of punishment, age of enlightenment, personalities behind correctional institutions, Caesar, Marquess of Vicaria, Venetia, Cesar Lombroso, William the Conqueror, Enrico Ferri, and Clifford Shaw. So first, Sing Sing Prison, alcohol and substance abuse treatment programs, anger management programs, educational vocational programs, family development programs, guidance and counseling services, library and law library services, recreational programs, religious services, sex offender treatment programs, temporary release programs, trauma programs, transitional services programs, and veteran services. So first, we tackle about volunteer services and programs. Sing Sing Info Sing Sing Correctional Facility, maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York. In use since 1826, it is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States. It is also among the most well-known in the country, especially notable for its harsh condition in the 19th and 20th century. So this is the picture of Sing Sing Prison. Sing Sing Prison in the Houston River at Ossining, New York. Originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison, it was constructed in the village of Sing Sing in the east bank of the Hudson River, some 30 miles north of New York City. It was designed to provide additional prison space and to replace Newgate Prison. Construction was undertaken in 1825 by convict laborers under the supervision of Elam Lynch, warden of Auburn State Prison. He officially became head of the new prison when it opened in 1826, though it was not completed until 1828. The initial facility had 800 cells. The prison population rose in the mid-19th century, resulting in more construction. The four-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 1,600 inmates. Because most of the early convicted criminals traveled by boat to Sing Sing, the praise of the river came to mean going to prison. One of the notable visitors to the prison was Alexis de Tocqueville, author of Democracy in America. The French government sent him and Gustave de Beaumont to the United States in 1831 to gather information about the American penal system. The two men were amazed at the total subjugation under which prisoners worked and administrative power the warden wielded at Sing Sing. Lynch resigned as warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Auburn in 1838. He was asked to leave the prison a year, which later, after the death of the prisoner, was punished severely for feigning illness. Despite this record, Sing Sing rehired Lynch in 1843. Whippings and floggings were commonplace punishment at Sing Sing. Frequently used was the cut on nine tails, a cruel whipping contraption whose lashes were often tipped with metal or barbs. Its use finally abolished by the New York State legislature in 1848. In addition, while Lynch was warden, inmates were expected to refrain from making noise, which included talking. With the advent of the electric chair in 1891, Sing Sing became notorious for its executions. Although the electric chair was developed in neighboring Auburn, almost all executions within the state were carried out at Sing Sing until 1963. The infamous death chair was later moved to Green Haven Prison. Sing Sing was also the site of reforms that affected the national penal system. Reformer Thomas Mott Osborne who developed his penology theories while voluntarily incarcerated for a year at Auburn, served as Sing Sing's warden in 1914 to 15 and 1916, but his immediate sweeping changes were assailed and he resigned under intense political pressure. During his tenure, however, the first psychological work with inmates began. More reforms were instituted under Lewis Edward Lois, who served as warden from 1920 to 1941. He notably improved the living conditions within the prison and allowed inmates to participate in sports. So, this is the picture of Osborne Thomas Mott. Then, Sing Sing prison cell. So, this is sample of the room in or this Sing Sing prison cell. A cell at Sing Sing prison, Ossining, New York, on 1910 to 15. In 1901, the residents of Sing Sing village changed its name to Ossining. They wanted to distance, if not disassociate to the town from the notorious prison. From that same reason, in 1970, the state renamed the prison Ossining Correctional Facility. Auburn State Prison, located in Auburn, New York, opened in 1816. It established a disciplinary and administrative system based on silence, corporal punishment, and congregate labor. In architecture and routine, Auburn became the model for prisons throughout the United States. In the early 19th century, many Americans believed that industrialization and dramatic demographic, economic, and political upheavals had conspired against traditional controls of family, church, and community. From their perspective, these moral guardians could no longer adequately control this order. They saw crime as the product of social chaos. Necessary to its eradication was a structured environment in which deviants could be separated from the disorder of society and the contagion of one another. Their solution was to create the penitentiary, a new institution for reforming offenders and ultimately restoring social stability. Auburn originally used concrete cells, but in 1821, Warden William Britton borrowed the concept of solitary cells from the so-called Pennsylvania system. Britton designed a unique five-tiered cell block of two rows of single cells, placed back-to-back in the center of the building. Cells measured only 3.5 feet or 1.6 meters wide, 7.5 feet or 2.3 meters long, and 7 feet or 2.1 meters high. Doors face outer walls lined with grated windows and provided indirect light and air. This pattern of small inside cell blocks was later adopted by most state prisons in the United States. Whereas the Pennsylvania system inmates did handicraft work in their cells, Auburn prisoners labored in concrete workshops, offsetting imprisonment caused by fulfilling private industry. A hidden passageway with small openings surrounded by the work area, allowing inspectors and visitors to surreptitiously monitor the inmates. Auburn briefly implemented a three-level classification system. Under it, minor offenders labored in workshops during the day and retired to separate cells at night. Serious offenders alternated their days between solitary confinement and concrete work. The most hardened criminals were placed in the solitary confinement without work. After numerous suicides, instances of mental illness, and attempted escapes, the governor of New York terminated the classification system and the experiment of solitary confinement. Subsequently, all male inmates work in congregate shops by day, returning to individual cells at night. Females first committed to Auburn in 1825 were relegated to an attic and excluded from regular work and exercise. To ensure that inmates did not corrupt one another, Britain's successor Elma Leeds enforced a quasi-military routine of absolute silence, strict discipline, and economic productivity. In response, bills, age-7 inmates dressed in stripped clothing silently marched in lockstep formation to and from their cells for meals and work assignments. Letters were banned, and the chaplain was the only occasional visitor. Flogging and the other forms of corporal punishment enforced the rules. Such regimentation was thought necessary to restrain the rebellious nature of the offenders. Eventually, overcrowding made the silence system unenforceable. An over system of discipline deteriorated into corrupt and lax routines of harsh punishment. After the Civil War, the spirit of the reform withered and contract labor was no longer profitable. Despite the demise of the ideal system, Auburn remained the model for nearly a century. primarily because it had been inexpensive to construct and maintain. Unlike Auburn or Sing Sing, Pennsylvania's Eastern Penitentiary in 1829 was intended to keep convicts separate even as they worked in order to prevent any earthly contamination or destruction that might impede their repentance. Hence, the term penitentiary located in Cherry Hill and the outskirts of Pennsylvania. Eastern represented one of the most imposing and expensive architectural achievements in the United States to date, and it contained innovations such as running water and flush toilets in all cells. Different types of criminal punishment. The following are five of the most commonly seen types of criminal punishment. Incapacitation. Incapacitation seeks to prevent future crime by physically moving criminals away from society. This punishment can be traced to ancient times. Tyrants made and Hong Long right in punishment. A comparative historical perspective. Banishment was a common penalty in antiquity. Later, it was common for colonizing European countries to ship convicts and undesirables overseas. In modern times, house arrest, incarceration, and death penalty are all forms of incapacitation. Findings by the Bureau of Justice Statistics or BJS have brought the effectiveness of this method into question. According to the VGA's data, about two-thirds or 67.8% of prisoners released back into society were arrested for a new crime within 3 years, and about three-quarters or 76.6% were arrested within 5 years. Despite these findings, incapacitation is a common form of punishment in the United States. Second is deterrence. The goal of deterrence is to persuade citizens and possible offenders or re-offenders to conform to the rules of law. Min and Lu explained that four types of deterrence are generally recognized. First, a specific deterrence analyzes how effective punishment is on an individual's future behavior. Second, general deterrence seeks to understand how individual punishment can deter others from committing crimes. Third, marginal deterrence seeks to reconcile how effective different types of punishment are as either specific or general deterrence. Last, partial deterrence refers to situations in which the threat of penalty has some deterrent value even when someone engages in illegal behavior. For example, a criminal simply robbing a victim instead of also causing physical harm. The effectiveness of deterrence as a criminal punishment is difficult to assess because people may follow the law for other reasons that may be challenging to track, such as religious or moral beliefs, physical incapacitation, or lack of opportunity. Next is retribution. As one of the oldest forms of punishment, retribution has roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition of justice. In her book Criminal Law, Liza M. Storm explains that retribution prevents crime by giving victims or society a certain sense of satisfaction that a defendant has been punished appropriately, reinforcing the belief that the criminal justice system is working effectively. Modern examples of retribution include the widespread practices of imposing fines as well as enforcing mandatory sentencing policy for certain offenses under the law. As an effective punishment, retribution had been criticized as being overly rigid and limited in its capacity to change societal behavior. However, it remains popular. Next is rehabilitation, a common prison policy in America up until the 1970s. Rehabilitation focuses on helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that lead them to committing criminal acts. This includes developing occupational skills as well as resolving psychological issues such as drug addiction and aggression, explains the American Psychological Association or APA. Consider the opposite of retribution. The ultimate purpose of rehabilitation is to transition offenders back into society. The APA reports that in examining massive data, individualized approaches to crime, complemented with community-based approaches, can prove effective in reducing offender recidivism. Next is restoration. a radically different approach to criminal punishment. The goal of restoration is for the offender to make direct amends to both the victim and the community in which the crime was committed. Although a relatively new practice in modern times, the concept of restorative justice can be found in the early legal systems of Western Europe, ancient Hebrew justice, and pre-colonial African societies. During the process of restoration, victims initiate a process in which both they are defender meet to share feelings and concerns. The dialogue offers victims the opportunity to be heard and the offender to make amends and receive forgiveness. Restorative justice is often used in crimes involving youth offenders. Age of Enlightenment. Personalities behind correctional institution. Cesar Beccaria. In full, Cesar Bunisana Marches de Beccaria. Born March 15, 1738 in Milan, Italy. Died November 28, 1794. An Italian criminologist and economist whose De Delati e Delpini 1764 English translation J. A. Farrer Crimes and Punishment in 1880 was a celebrated volume on the reform of criminal justice. Beccaria was the son of a Milanese aristocrat of modest means. From an early age, he displayed the essential traits of his character. A highly volatile temperament resulted in periods of enthusiasm followed by depression and inactivity. He was reserved and somewhat taciturn in his social contacts but placed great value on his personal and family relationships. At the age of 8, he was sent to the Jesuit school in Parma. Beccaria later described the education he received there as fanatical and stiffly to the development of human feelings. Although he revealed a mathematical aptitude, little in his student days gave indication of remarkable intellectual achievements that were soon to follow. In 1758, he received a degree in law from University of Pavia. In 1760, Beccaria proposed marriage to the 16-year-old Teresa Blasco, encountered the obdurate opposition of his father. The following year, the marriage took place without parental consent, and the young couple began their life together in poverty. The breach between father and son was ultimately repaired, and Beccaria and his wife were received into the family home. In 1762, a daughter, the first of his three children, was born. Marquess of Beccaria Bonicia, Italian economist and proponent of judicial reform. Cesare Beccaria was the author of the most famous Italian work of the Enlightenment on crimes and punishments. He was born into the noble family of the state of Milan, which was part of the Austrian Habsburg Empire, and was schooled by the Jesuits in Parma. After receiving his law degree from the University of Pavia in 1758, he returned to live in Milan. Beccaria's 20s were the most important decade in his intellectual and emotional life. He was temperamentally inclined to lethargy and anxiety, but when young could also be galvanized by inspiration and express his feelings in the language of Rousseau. He married his first wife in 1761 against strong resistance from his family, and wrote on crimes and punishment in 1763. When he was 25, his friendships with Pietro Verri in 1728 to 1797 and other ardent young Milanese reformers did not, however, outlast the 1760s. For their eyes, he seemed to lose all of his vitality and to settle into an arid and routine private life, which nevertheless allowed him to hold his melancholy at bay. Beccaria himself dated his discovery of the Enlightenment to 1761. When he began to read the works of the French and Scottish philosophies and discussed them with a circle of young friends led by Pietro Verri, in all the provinces of the Austrian Empire, including Milan, Absolutist reforms emanating from Vienna continued to encounter entrenched resistance from noble and ecclesiastical corporations and from the juridical culture of the ancient regime. Viri Vicaria and the other cohort wished to modernize and rationalize the economy and legal system in line with Enlightenment secular morality, and they supported governmental reform. On Crimes and Punishment was first published in 1764, with subsequent editions following rapidly. Beccaria prepared the edition now regarded as definitive in 1766. The work became known in France through the translation of André Morellet, 1727-1819, who freely altered the Italian text. Beccaria, for some reason, never protested against this, and, and then it spread throughout Europe. It was attacked by conservatives everywhere and was defended by the adherents of the Enlightenment. Voltaire composed a commentary on it. In October 1766, Viry and Beccaria journeyed to Paris to bask in admiration of the philosopher's there, but Beccaria quickly became despondent and fled back to Milan. On Crimes and Punishment combines elements from social contract theory with utilitarian position. It touches on many aspects of law and justice in a rapid, impassioned style, completely abjuring legal technicalities. Criminal law ought to state clearly what is forbidden and what the penalties are and ought to be applied uniformly to all, with no room for discretionary interpretation by juries or magistrates or gracious pardon from the sovereign. The penalties themselves should be carefully proportioned to the corresponding crimes and calibrated to deliver the minimum of punishment necessary. Beccaria showed in all cases to minimize or abolish the use of violence and infliction in Japan. He argued against the use of torture in the gathering of evidence, highlighting its absurdity and against the death penalty, emphasizing its failure to deter. The thrust of the work was to guarantee the individual citizen against arbitrariness, delay, secrecy, and useless and excessive violence in the codification of the law and application of penal sanctions. Overall, the book is a sustained attack on the juridical culture of the ancient regime, as well as sketch of the principles on which it ought to be reformed so as to produce the greatest happiness shared among the greatest. Next is Cesar Lombroso, described as the father of modern criminology. Cesar Lombroso's theory of the born criminal dominated thinking about criminal behavior in the late 19th and early 20th century. November 6, 1835 to October 1909, was the founder of the Italian school of positivist criminology. He rejected the established classical school, which held that crime was a characteristic trait of human nature and that rational choices were the foundation of behavior. Lombroso, using the scientific approach and concepts drawn from physiognomy, early eugenics, psychiatry, and social Darwinism, argued that criminality was inherited and that the born criminal could be identified by physical defects which confirm as a criminal a savage or atavistic, while his particular identifying characteristics are no longer considered valid. The idea of factors that predispose certain individuals to commit crime continues to be foundational to work in criminology. Together with this emphasis on the scientific method, this revolutionary approach has earned Lombroso the title Father of Scientific Criminology. William the Conqueror. William refers by name William the Conqueror or William the Bastard or William of Normandy, French Guillaume Le Courant or Guillaume de Libard, was born 1828 Falaise, Normandy, died in September 9, 1087 in Rouen. Duke of Normandy as William II from 1035 and King of England as William I from 1066 one of the greatest soldiers and rulers of the Middle Ages. He made himself the mightiest noble in France and then changed the course of England's history by his conquest of that country. Enrico Ferri. Ferri was born in Lombardy in 1856 and worked first as a lecturer and later as the professor of criminal law. Having spent time as a student of Cesare Lombroso, while Lombroso researched anthropological criminology, Ferri focused more on social and economic influences on the criminal and crime rates. Ferri's research led to him postulating theories calling for the crime prevention and methods to the mainstay of law enforcement. As opposed to punishment of criminals after their crimes had taken place, he became a founder of the positivist school, and he researched psychological and social positivism as opposed to the biological positivism of Lombroso. Ferri, at the time of radical, was elected to Italian parliament in 1886. In 1893, he joined the Italian Socialist Party and edited their daily newspaper, The Avante. In 1900 and 1904, he spoke out in Congress against the rules of socialist ministers in Borghese governments. Ferri favored Italian neutrality during World War I, and he was re-elected as a Socialist Party deputy in 1921. In post-war Italy, he became supporter of Mussolini's fascist regime. Ferri died in 1929. Clifford Shaw. Clifford Rolfe Shaw was an American sociologist and criminologist. He was a major figure in the Chicago School of Sociology during the 1930s and 1940s, and is considered to be one of the most influential figures in American criminology. His work on juvenile delinquencies and Henry D. Mackey conducted in the late 1920s played a pivotal role in moving the study of such delinquency toward the discipline of sociology and away from psychology and psychiatry. Shaw and Mackey's work spanned three general areas: studying geographic variations in range of juvenile delinquencies, the study of autobiographical works by delinquents, and the development of the Chicago area projects. The Delinquency Prevention Program in the Chicago area, the two studies published by Shaw and Mackey in the 1930s and 1940s were still held in high regard among social scientists in the 1970s. Next, anger management programs. First, what is anger? Anger is an emotion characterized by antagonism towards someone or something among you feel deliberately done you wrong. Anger can be a good thing. It can give you a way to express negative feelings, for example, or motivate you to find solutions to problems. But excessive anger can cause problems. Management is a set of principles relating to the function of planning, organizing, directing, and controlling of the application of these principles and harnessing physical, financial, human, and informational resources efficiently and effectively to achieve organizational goals. Anger management programs is an act, way, or process in which it talks facilitate or control about the angerness of a person. It gives knowledge to a person about angerness on how we can control about it so that we can't harm or hurt other people. One of these is the other people to counseling by the professionals like teachers, doctors, and others. Guidance and counseling services. Counseling, the process of assisting and guiding clients, especially by a trained person on a professional basis, to resolve especially personal, social, and psychological problems and difficulties. Guidance, advice, or information aimed at resolving a problem or difficulty, especially as given by someone in authority. The term information, guidance, and counseling services refers to services intended to assist individuals throughout their lives, to make educational, training, and career choices, and to manage their careers. It includes a wide range of activities. Religious services. Religious services, the act of public worship following prescribed rules, like the Sunday service or divine service, religious ceremony, religious ritual. A ceremony having religious meaning. Church service, such as service conducted in the house of worship. Don't be late for church. Trauma programs. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. There are three main types of trauma: acute, chronic, or complex. Acute trauma results from a single incident. Chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged, such as the domestic violence or abuse. Complex trauma is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often an invasive or interventional nature. So, trauma programs. Trauma programs is a movement that helps people who has trauma to help the patient from suffering of the intense effect of trauma. Temporary release programs. Temporary release means that you are released from prison for a specified period of time for a specific purpose or reason. Temporary release programs refer to programs which allow release of a prisoner from the place of his or her imprisonment for a limited period. It helps the transition of prisoners from prison to the community. Recreational programs. Recreation activity done by enjoyment when one is not working. Athletic and recreational facilities refers to all the activities that people choose to do research their bodies and minds and make their leisure time more interesting and enjoyable. Examples of these types of programs include recreational sports leagues, ballroom dances classes, card clubs, neighborhood festivals, and local theater groups. And that's all. Thank you.